Hello, welcome to Sound and Fairy Book Reviews. As usual, I'm Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of Let Him In by William Friend. This is a book coming out October 3rd, 2023, right in time for Halloween. It's from Poison Pen Press and it is a horror mystery. I received this art from NetGalley in exchange for a fair review. If you want a creepy, atmospheric, but not too scary horror novel for spooky season, Let Him In fits that bill exactly. What is it about? Alfie wakes one night to find his twin daughters at the foot of his bed, claiming there's a shadowy figure in their room. When no such thing can be found, he assumes the girls had a nightmare. He isn't surprised that they're troubled. Grief has made its home in Hart House. 9 months ago, the twins' mother Pippa died unexpectedly, leaving Alfie to raise them alone. Very British names, eh? And now, when the girls mention a new imaginary friend, it seems like a harmless coping mechanism. But the situation quickly develops into something more insidious. The girls set an extra place for him at the table. They whisper to him. They say he's going to take them away. Alfie calls upon Julia, Pippa's sister and a psychiatrist, to oust the malignant tenant from their lives. But as Alfie himself is haunted by visions and someone watches him at night, he begins to question the true character of the force that has poisoned his daughters' minds with dark and violent consequences. Whatever this friend is, he doesn't want to leave. Alfie will have to confront his own shameful spirits, the dark past of Hart House, and even the bounds of reality, or risk taking part in an unspeakable tragedy. So I organized my TBR about 6 weeks in advance. So when I realized I was to read this, which I requested a few months ago, I was like, oh, why did I do this to myself? Anything with kids in it, I'm always wary of reading when it comes to horror. But I also love horror, and I love horror about haunted houses where the main focus is the mystery behind the story versus like the scary bits themselves. This book fits this quite well, as there are some very unsettling parts, think of a cellar and a dark old house at night and kids saying weird stuff. But the main gist of the book is the mystery behind it. It's a dual POV novel told in the perspective of the grieving widower Alfie and his sister-in-law Julia. This aspect was really well done because it showed how different people process grief, but also how awkward grief can be when you feel your grief isn't as deep as someone else's, despite having lost the same person and missing them terribly. Like when I went to my friend's funeral when she died when she was 27, I was about 26. I was grieving terribly for that. I had been friends with her since I was 5, but, my grief felt like nothing compared to her parents, right? So it kind of has that kind of idea to it. Like, how do we get comfort when we feel like we should be the ones comforting, even though we're hurting? Anyway, I also liked how the grief wasn't fresh. It was almost a year past, which made the story a little less sad and kind of more melancholy, more kind of like we need to move on, but we can't. It had a lot of focus on the grief, and I thought that was really well done. It wasn't like overbearing. I wasn't like depressed reading it, but it was deeper than I guess I expected a horror to go in that category. I liked the sister Julia far more than the father Alfie, as he was so incredibly incompetent. It felt like a stereotype a bit, but at the same time, it is kind of known that when men take backseat to household duties or are micromanaged in it by their wives, they tend to struggle more when forced to solo parent. It's a problem for everyone. It's a societal thing. I see it with some of my friends. I also don't see it with some of my male friends who are parents, and I think we're kind of moving in a better direction, but it still is definitely a thing. So I thought that was interesting, even though I found Alfie kind of annoying. I also understand that he was grieving, but I mean, my dude, adult up. The narration was also well done because the point of view in first person has a distinctive voices for Alfie and Julia. He's more serious, she's more sarcastic. That part was really well done. When it comes to the horror ghost aspects, one of the things I really appreciated about the story was how Alfie and Julia rationalized the weird shit the twins say as just odd kid stuff. And it's true, if you don't have kids, they say weird, creepy things all the time, and you just kind of ignore it because you're like, oh yeah, they're just saying stuff. Or they'll say, like my daughter makes these really dark jokes sometimes, and I'm just like, that's not appropriate. Don't say that. But she doesn't understand. She doesn't know. Yeah. She also when she was 3, used to talk about this witch lady that lived in our shed, and we of course we laughed it off. We made jokes whenever something odd happened in the house, being like, oh, the witch did it. So as a parent, it made total sense to me when Alfie and Julia just kind of reacted to this by thinking it was a psychological thing or just imagination. It wasn't supernatural. That rang perfectly true to me. The ghost story also has an intriguing mystery where you aren't sure the entire time whether what was happening was real or psychological. This is one of my favorite tropes in horror, so I was very much into that, and obviously I'm not going to spoil it. It's really, really interesting though. The pacing was also well done. The creepy stuff starts pretty much right away, and the reason for them like staying in the house, as it were, made sense and it wasn't too drawn out. The story is slower than jump scare horror, but I like that approach, so it worked for me. I thought it was actually quite quick, but I saw other reviewers saying it was slow, but I was like, I didn't find it slow. One thing I wasn't super fond of was a relationship that developed between two characters. It felt quite forced to me, and personally, I wasn't into it. I'm not saying it was like wrong or anything. I mean, you do you, people. But it bogged down the story near the end, and it felt like a bit forced to me. Like I was kind of like, oh, okay, whatever. Overall, though, I really, really enjoyed this eerie horror, which is perfect for people who like horror but don't like violence or gore. It's great for Halloween. I highly recommend it, and thank you again to the publishers for the e-arc. I am very happy that I read it, even though I was kind of creeped out.